In the unforgiving landscape of Canadian fast food, a good reputation usually means the brand will survive. And sitting at the absolute top of the Ontario food chain is a company that seems to exist in defiance of these rules. If you walk into any high school, university dorm, or break room in Toronto and ask about pizza, the reaction is rarely one of culinary excitement. It's a food source often resigned to the desperate hours of the morning when every other option has locked its doors. Yet, they've weathered every economic recession and every dietary fad of the last half century without a scratch. It's a massive anomaly. How could a company seem to be winning the war for Canadian wallets while selling a product that its own customers claim to hate? The story begins in 1967, back when Toronto was a city that felt more like a large, strict church. It was famously nicknamed Toronto the Good, a label that wasn't a compliment so much as it was a warning about its suffocating boredom. Bars were closed early, liquor laws were puritanical, and the culinary scene was dominated by boiled meat and bland potatoes. In this era, pizza was an exotic novelty. Getting your hands on a slice required a legitimate commitment. You traveled to a parlor with red and white checkered tablecloths and your best clothes and ate your meal with silverware. A proper night out, completely removed from the modern concept of fast food. Into this landscape stepped Michael Overs. Overs was not a chef. He was a Toronto native who had dropped out of high school to work, and he possessed the unsentimental pragmatism of a born hustler. When he leased a tiny 300 square foot shop at the corner of Parliament and Wellesley, his ambition had nothing to do with culinary tradition. He looked past the food entirely and focused on solving a specific problem with the way people ate. Overs recognized that the biggest barrier to selling food was the friction. In the late 1960s, getting a meal delivered to a house was a logistical nightmare. A customer had to find a physical phone book, thumb through the yellow pages, and find a number. When they called, they were usually connecting directly to a chaotic kitchen where a distracted employee was shouting orders to a cook, often leading to mistakes. The delivery times were random, and the food often arrived cold. Overs realized that if he could remove this friction, the quality of the product would become less important. Speed and reliability would trump flavor. His first major innovation was to weaponize the telephone. Michael Overs understood that the interface for ordering pizza was the phone number itself. He began hunting for a number that had a rhythmic, musical quality, something that would lodge itself into the human brain and never leave. He eventually secured the rights to 967-1111. This sequence of digits became the foundation of the entire company. He commissioned a jingle that locked the numbers into a catchy, repetitive melody, blasting it across Toronto airwaves for decades.
967-1111, phone pizza, hey, hey, hey.
For an entire generation of Torontonians, hunger triggered an automatic Pavlovian response. The number was simply there, playing on a loop in their minds. 967-1111. This focus on the phone number allowed Pizza to pioneer the centralized call center. This was a massive technological leap. Instead of every store answering phones independently, calls could be handled centrally and orders relayed to the franchise location closest to the customer's house. They essentially built an analog version of Uber Eats in the 1970s, using landlines and fax machines to coordinate a massive logistical network. The second part of the friction equation was the delivery itself. Overs knew that a hungry customer is an angry customer. He implemented strict time limits and made it a point in their branding that pizzas will arrive on time, as shown in this ad.
967-1111, phone pizza, hey, hey, hey.
Maybe a little more enthusiasm. All right, now I got it.
And on this ad as well.
Hey.
To you.
Bye. Daddy, we got dinner.
Oh, you too. Perfect timing. Pizza. Always right, on time.
However, a business model built entirely on speed and logistics has a fatal flaw. When you treat food as a unit of inventory to be shipped, the culinary experience inevitably suffers. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the cracks in the Pizza foundation were beginning to show. The rise of foodie culture, fueled by the Food Network and increased travel, meant that the average consumer was becoming more discerning. They knew what fresh basil tasted like and that cheese shouldn't have the texture of plastic. Competitors began to flank them on all sides. You had the rise of gourmet fast food pizza chains like Panago, which offered pesto, shrimp, and goat cheese. You had the resurgence of authentic Italian pizzerias offering wood-fired pies, and on the low end, you had American giants like Little Caesars entering the market with aggressive pricing. Pizza Pizza found itself in the middle. They weren't the cheapest, they certainly weren't the best, and their speed advantage was eroding as everyone else started adopting better technology. The company faced a terrifying paradox. They possessed the logistical power to put a box on every doorstep in Ontario, but the public desire to open that box was evaporating. Michael Overs and his executive team needed a solution. A traditional restaurateur might have looked at the complaints and decided to overhaul the recipes, but that would have destroyed their margins and slowed down their assembly line. Pizza Pizza was a volume business who couldn't afford to be artisanal. So instead of fixing the pizza, they fixed the experience of eating it. They introduced the creamy garlic dipping sauce. The introduction of this small, foil-sealed cup is perhaps the single most important product decision in the company's history. When a customer dipped their slice into the garlic sauce, the texture of the dough became irrelevant. The dryness was counteracted by the oil, and the lack of flavor was overwhelmed by the aggressive punch of garlic and salt. The garlic dip transformed a mediocre slice into something substantial. It quickly became a cult item, leading to schoolyard markets where students traded slices for extra tubs and convincing even the brand's harshest critics to place orders just to get their hands on the sauce. The complaints about the crust didn't stop, but the sales kept climbing because the dip provided the dopamine hit that the pizza lacked. It was a brilliant, cynical, and incredibly effective pivot that proved a company doesn't need a great product if it has a great condiment. But Michael Overs knew that relying on a condiment wasn't a long-term survival strategy. He needed a structural advantage that rendered the quality of the pizza irrelevant. This line of thinking led to the development of an unusual strategy. In the restaurant industry, operators typically obsess over the destination model, where the goal is to be so good that a family will drive past 3 other restaurants to get to you. Overs realized that the destination model is fragile because it relies on the customer's choice, and instead saw far more potential in the forced model. This approach targets customers who are physically located in a venue or situation where they're hungry, tired, and have no other options. By placing his product directly in their path, he could intercept their money before they even had a chance to think about competitors. Pizza Pizza weaponized the concept of non-traditional franchising, and they stripped the operation down to a 200 square foot counter and inserted themselves in the most trafficked venues in the province. If you attend a Raptors game at the Scotiabank Arena, you're effectively trapped in a Pizza Pizza ecosystem. The markup in these venues is astronomical, yet the sales volume is guaranteed because the exclusive nature of the deal bars any of their competitors from the building. At that moment, the high price purchases the ability to eat without missing a single day, rendering the actual quality of the slice irrelevant. This strategy extends brilliantly into the academic world. Pizza Pizza secured contracts with colleges and universities across Ontario, planting franchise counters in student unions and cafeterias. For thousands of young adults living on campus, Pizza Pizza became their primary source of sustenance. By the time these students graduated and moved into their first apartments, the brand had been hardwired into their brain as the default option. Furthermore, this strategy is bolstered by a real estate portfolio that's been around since 1967. Because Pizza Pizza has been operating since then, they hold long-term leases on some of the most valuable corner units in Toronto. They secured these prime intersections decades ago, locking in locations that they would struggle to afford today. This massive, automated cash flow from thousands of captive customers creates a river of revenue, but the true brilliance of the Pizza Pizza model lies in a corporate structure designed to extract as much value as possible. The entity that trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the ticker PZA acts as a separate layer from the actual operations of the kitchens. This structure is the Pizza Pizza Royalty Corp. It owns the intellectual property like the trademarks, the recipes, and that 10-digit phone number. In exchange for the right to use these assets, the operational company pays the royalty corps a percentage of the system's sales from the royalty pool. The power of this model hinges on the distinction between top-line and bottom-line revenue. The royalty corp takes its cut from the gross sales, meaning they get paid before a single expense is deducted. This structure shifts the entire burden of operational risk onto the franchisee. If the price of mozzarella spikes, the franchisee absorbs the cost. If the provincial government raises the minimum wage, the franchisee's margins shrink. If a delivery driver crashes a car or an oven breaks down, the franchisee writes the check. The corporate entity sits above this volatility, collecting its percentage from the revenue stream before the bills are paid. This insulation makes the parent company incredibly resilient to economic turbulence. The cash flow is predictable and, historically, counter-cyclical. When the economy crashes and families tighten their belts, they stop going to the keg or fancy steakhouses. They trade down and order a pepperoni pizza. Consequently, the worse the economy gets, the more stable Pizza tends to look. It thrives on the very austerity that kills its higher-end competitors. The system further protects itself through a self-sustaining marketing loop. Franchisees are contractually obligated to contribute a set percentage of their sales into a centralized marketing fund. This massive pool of capital pays for the relentless barrage of flyers that clog Canadian mailboxes, the slick television commercials, and the expensive sponsorships of the NHL and CFL. In essence, the local store owners pay to keep the brand famous, and their capital buys the visibility that drives the sales, which in turn generates the royalties for the corporation. This capital-light model fuels an expansion strategy that borders on predatory. Since the franchisees front the cash to build and equip the restaurants, the corporation can flood a neighborhood without taking on debt. They can, and will, place locations just blocks apart, which is problematic, as you'd expect, for the franchisee. The system is ruthlessly designed to prioritize the saturation of the market over the profitability of the individual unit. For decades, this financial fortress seemed impenetrable. However, in the early 2010s, the borders opened and the American giants launched a coordinated invasion that money alone couldn't fix. For years, the Canadian market had been somewhat insulated, operating as a distinct ecosystem. That isolation ended when brands like Domino's, Papa John's, and Little Caesars began an aggressive expansion north of the border. These were global capital machines with deep pockets and tested strategies, arriving with the specific intent of dismantling the local competition. Little Caesars posed the most immediate threat to Michael Over's legacy. With their hot and ready campaign, they allowed a customer to walk in, drop $5 on the counter, and walk out with a pepperoni pizza in 10 seconds.
Large pizza, it's here. $5 every day of the year.
It effectively nuked the value proposition of the famous phone number. Why dial 967-1111 and wait 40 minutes for a delivery when you could have dinner instantly for half the price? Simultaneously, Domino's had effectively rebranded itself as a technology company that happened to sell pizza. They revolutionized the industry with the pizza tracker, gamifying the waiting process alongside a slick, intuitive app that made ordering incredibly easy. By comparison, Pizza's call center began to look like a relic from the fax machine era. To neutralize Little Caesars, Pizza utilized their sheer density. Pizza realized that while Little Caesars was cheap, they were often sparsely located. Pizza, with its 750 locations, was usually just around the corner. They introduced their own aggressive walk-in specials, flooding the sidewalks with sandwich boards advertising slices to go and XL pizzas at prices that matched the Americans. They effectively suffocated the hot and ready advantage by simply being physically closer to the customer. To neutralize Domino's, they pivoted hard. The current CEO, Paul Goddard, recognized that the 967-1111 jingle was becoming a liability with a generation that hates making phone calls. The company invested millions into a digital transformation, building an app that mirrored the functionality of their American rival. they introduced real-time tracking, digital wallets, and a revamped loyalty program called Club 1111. Crucially, they fought a bitter war to maintain their own organic delivery ecosystem. During this period, Silicon Valley aggregators like Uber Eats and DoorDash were entering the market, promising restaurants massive exposure in exchange for a crippling 30% commission. Pizza Pizza resisted this, incentivizing customers to use their proprietary app by offering lower prices and delivery guarantees that Uber couldn't match. This decision protected their margins and, more importantly, ensured that Pizza Pizza owned the customer relationship. By the end of the decade, Pizza Pizza had successfully modernized its infrastructure. They had neutralized the price threat, caught up on the tech front, and even diversified their menu. They looked ready for another decade of steady, boring growth. But boring was not what came. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, retail and hospitality sectors faced an immediate existential threat. Provincial governments issued stay-at-home orders, and suddenly, restaurants that had spent decades perfecting their ambience and table service found themselves with a business model that was legally prohibited from existing, with many forced to pivot to delivery overnight. Pizza Pizza, however, didn't need to pivot. They'd spent 50 years optimizing for this exact scenario. They were able to keep operating through delivery and takeout and move to address the anxiety of the moment, introducing tamper-proof boxes with safety seals and contactless delivery protocols. For millions of people locked in their homes, the brand's value proposition shifted. The jokes about cardboard crust didn't vanish, but they were eclipsed by the need for reliability. In a period of massive uncertainty, Pizza Pizza offered a rare, predictable constant. It was cheap, fast, and available when the supply chains for better food were collapsing. This period solidified their role as the utility provider of the food world. As the world emerged from the pandemic, the company faced a new set of hurdles. Global inflation sent the price of flour, cheese, and cardboard through the roof, while a tightening labor market made staffing hundreds of locations increasingly expensive. Simultaneously, a growing health halo trend pushed consumers toward fresher, less processed ingredients, theoretically leaving a brand like Pizza Pizza behind. Yet, the financial markets remained unfazed. In late 2025, Pizza Pizza Royalty Corp reported that despite heightened competition, their royalty pool sales were actually increasing. They managed this by leaning even harder into their role as a Canadian value play. While premium restaurants raised their prices to eye-watering levels, Pizza Pizza used its massive scale to keep its increases modest. They utilized their domestic supply chain to bypass the worst of the international trade wars and tariffs, sourcing Canadian ingredients to protect their franchisees from import-related spikes, ensuring that in an even more uncertain world, Pizza Pizza will remain a reliable option. The ascent of Pizza Pizza from a single shop in a quiet Toronto neighborhood to a national powerhouse is a masterclass in business pragmatism. By focusing on a singular goal of eliminating friction, Michael Overs built a logistical fortress that thrives on the simple, inescapable reality that people are almost always in a hurry. As long as Canadians continue to visit stadiums, attend universities, and look for a reliable meal at 2 a.m., those orange signs will keep humming. The brand has survived every crisis the last century has thrown at it by refusing to be anything other than what it is: the reliable choice. You might still make the joke about the cardboard, but Michael Overs and his successors are the ones laughing all the way to the bank. But what do you think? Has the quality actually improved, or is the Canadian public simply caught in the most successful marketing loop in history? Would anyone even eat the pizza if that garlic sauce didn't exist? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching, and stay curious.